Income Tax 2020, Practice Problem 1, Part 3. We're going to be doing the data input related to the W-2 forms, the employee income forms. We're going to do it this time instead of with the actual tax forms into the tax formula, a tax formula constructed within an Excel worksheet. Come in, relax with Income Tax 2020. Here we are in our Lacerte tax software. You don't need the Lacerte tax software to follow along, although I do think they have a 30-day free trial. So if you can get access to a promotional or demo version of it, it could be a good tool to practice with. This time we're going to be going to and focusing in on the tax formula, doing so with an Excel worksheet. If you have access to the Excel worksheet, then you can follow along and fill out the Excel worksheet as we go. If you do not, you can just see how the Excel worksheet works in terms of formula and how it kind of ties into the actual tax forms and the software, and or you can put together your own worksheet in a similar fashion within Excel, and you can see how it's kind of put together if you want to do that as well. So last time in the prior presentations, we set up a comprehensive problem. We set up our information, opening up our information from our folder that we might get, say, from a client if we're doing a taxes for someone else, and then we opened them up into our Adobe Reader. So they look like this, and then we lined them up in order of importance, starting off with the W-2s, and then we took the W-2 information and we input it into the tax software here. And our typical idea here is going to be that we're going to be taking the data input, putting it into the 1040, and then we're going to mirror the same data input from the data input, not from the tax return, and put it into the worksheet, into our Excel worksheet. And by doing two separate data inputs from the source document, that will help us alleviate or reduce the likelihood that we have a data input error, given the fact that a tax return is just an income statement and therefore doesn't have a double entry accounting system to help us out with that. Notice that when you put information into these two formats, you can actually do it if you work in a firm with two people entering a lot of the data into the two systems, and that can help you out with a double check as well as you try to reconcile then the two systems together. And you'll be more likely to pick up any kind of data input errors. If you could pick up the data input errors at this point, it's going to be a lot easier than picking them up later when you have to possibly amend a return or something like that, or some changes happen that complicate things in the future. So last time we took our W-2 information we entered the baseline data into the tax software, and this information could come from the prior year and or the W-2 information, including the marital status. So I mean the filing status, which is married. Then we had the two individuals that we could get from the W-2 information as we populate it. And then we have the address and the social security numbers. All that information can be gotten from the W-2. When we look at the Excel worksheet, we're really starting to focus in down here in the actual calculation, entering the data into the system. Also note that when we entered the data over here on the W-2s, we entered the information for the federal income tax withheld and the taxes, as well as the Social Security and Medicare. Now, when I enter it into Excel, I'm not going to be focused so much on the Social Security and Medicare. Hopefully the Social Security and Medicare are basically informational information for the most part, unless there's some kind of cap limitation or the W-2 was wrong in some way. And we're going to be focusing in on the data input for the federal income tax. So that's kind of what our general focus will be when we go into the Excel worksheet. Now also note that you can make your Excel worksheet a lot more complicated than we have here, or a lot more simple than we have here, and you're going to have to rely to some degree on the tax returns, meaning you probably don't want to actually calculate the tax with the tables or something like that in the Excel worksheet. You probably want to depend on the software, at least to some degree, for your taxes. And other information like income phase-out limitations and whatnot, to some degree, you might want to depend on the software to basically help you out with that, rather than recalculating those things into your Excel system. So whatever, you're going to have to kind of find a middle ground in terms of what you're comfortable with in terms of entering the data into the Excel worksheet, and how much you want to like recalculate everything, and how much you want to basically depend on the computer system. Our goal here is basically to understand the return, be able to answer questions with the return, be able to have a justification or understand if there was an audit or something that happens with the return, and to reduce the likelihood of a data input error that is going to cause a problem in the future as well. Okay, so what we're going to do, and also note that we wouldn't typically do this every time we enter a piece of data, meaning I'm not going to enter, I wouldn't normally enter the W-2 information into the tax return and then enter the W-2 information into the Excel worksheet like one document at a time. I would do the whole tax return first in the software, then the whole tax return in the Excel worksheet. But we want to put them kind of side by side so we can see the comparison with each step along the way. Okay, so that means that we're going to go then to our data, and as much as possible, I don't want to go to Lacert, but take the information from the W-2 data. Now, this is the W-2 data that we have, and like I say, it's a mocked up W-2 information that we have here. So obviously, I don't need to enter all the information, like the employee information, the ID number, and whatnot. I just need to identify that, you know, it's one person's tax return versus the other tax return. So I'm going to then go over to my Excel sheet and just enter this data. So I'm on the income line item on the tax formula, and then I'm going to go into the next Excel worksheet that feeds into that income line, and that's going to be the income worksheet. So the income worksheet is the primary worksheet that feeds in there. So I'm going to go over here and say we've got W-2-1, and so I might label this as like W-2-1 or something like that, W-2 number 1, and I might for the taxpayer or something like that. If there's multiple W-2s, it can get a little bit more confusing. But then I'm going to go back on over here and I'm going to pull the data, and the data is going to be 50,000 for the box 1. This is the one I'm focusing in on here. So I'm going to say 50,000 for box 1. And then I have the federal income tax that I need to be dealing with as well. So if I pull that 50,000, it's going to pull over to the box 1. There's the 50,000 there in box 1. That makes sense. Now I'm going to jump all the way down to the bottom now and go to the payments section down here, because that's the other part that's on the W-2. So I got to jump down here. I can't do it in order because I got to fill out the second part of the W-2, which is on the bottom half of the return, the amount that we paid. So the payments that I'm going to have, and again, I'm going to tie this in. I can even use a formula maybe to the same W-2 there. And then I'm going to say that this amount that was withheld was 5,000. So I'm going to say, all right, 5,000 withheld here, 5,000. And that then is going to feed into the first page of the W-2 down at the bottom. Now, it doesn't make sense. The tax refund doesn't make sense because I don't have any tax yet, and I'm not going to use the Excel system to try to calculate the tax. I'm going to check this number. I'm going to check this number. I'm going to use Lacert to figure the tax then, and then it'll all kind of work out. So I'm going to depend on Lacert to some degree. I'm basically verifying. I'm going to try to get to verifying the taxable income and then the item down below. Okay, and then we also had state taxes that were paid here. So we had state taxes of the 450. So we got the 450 on the state taxes. Now you might just list it out. I have a line item for the state taxes, California payments. And again, I might say that this is going to be equal to the same W-2. I'm going to pick up the same W-2 information that I had here. And I think it was 500. Now this isn't going to pull into the worksheet at all any other place, unless it pulls in, if we want to pull it into the Schedule A, which we might look into later. Let me just make sure I got that amount right before I start talking too much. If I go into the, it's 450. It's 450. So 450. So that might go into the Schedule A later, but we're going to talk about that later. We're not talking about Schedule A right now. It's not part of the federal income tax returns, however, so it's going to affect the federal income tax return possibly by being deductible in an itemized deduction if we're itemizing, which we're not going to be doing yet. So we'll talk about that possibly later. And so that's going to be that information. That looks good. So let's see, and then so that's going to be the primary information there. Let's go to W-2, and then so this is going to be for the spouse here, and I'm going to enter that. And just note also, if I go back here, you notice that I didn't do anything for the Social Security wages. I didn't do anything for the Social Security tax withheld, Medicare wages, Medicare tax withheld, and unless those are usually informational type of things. Now, if I notice that there's high income, the income was over, over the cap for Social Security, then I might be more likely to say, oh, there might be a problem with Social Security. Maybe if they had multiple W-2s for one employee, they might have gone over the cap, and then I might note that somewhere to try to fill it out on the worksheet and then look for it in the tax software. So I'll keep my eye out for that, but I'm not going to enter all this data in to my worksheet. Again, you could put another more complex worksheet that would kind of double check the Social Security tax and whatnot, if you so choose, to see if there was a cap limitation that was reached and whatnot, and double check that kind of information. Also note that I didn't put anything down here for box 12 for the retirement plan, and this has already been reduced from box 1, so it's not going to have effect on the federal income taxes, but it could have an effect on determining whether or not they qualify for an IRA or something like that, or suggesting how much more money they can put into a 401k plan. So I'm not going to put that into my Excel worksheet here, because I'm going to kind of depend on the software to give me those suggestions. I put that in my notes in the open items already, and so I've got it noted down. But right now I'm not going to put that into the Excel worksheet. I'm just going to focus in on the federal income taxes. So then I'm going to go to the second item, and again, you could make another worksheet that's kind of more complex, where you're double checking kind of more things. It just depends on how much checking you want to do here. So then we're going to go then to the second one, and we got the 30,000. So I'm going to say, all right, 30,000 here, back to the worksheet. This is going to be, I'll say W-2 number 2 for this is the spouse. 30,000 in the income. That adds up to the 80,000, which is pulling into the first page on box 1. So there's the 80,000. All I'm doing here is picking up with a formula, the prior worksheet, and putting it over here. That brings us the adjusted gross income of the 80,000, because we got a no adjustments that are above the line deductions. And then we'll get back to this shortly. This should be married. We can actually do that now. This should be the standard deduction for married, which should be 24,800. Down here, so I'm just going to pick them up down here. I got my little worksheet down here to show us the standard deductions. So I'm going to pick the one up for married. That brings us to the 55,200 at this point in time on the income side of things. So then going back over here, I'm going to say, all right, Excel worksheet, or the data, I got 3,000 withheld. So 3,000 withheld. So I'm going to go to my withholdings, and that's going to be at the bottom of the formula down here. So then I'm going to go to my payments, and this is going to be 3,000, and I'm going to pick this up from the same W-2, W-2, and so now my withholdings down here are pulling over to that 8,000. So we got the 8,000 down below, and then I'm going to go back on over and say the state tax withheld was 370. So I'm going to say, all right, state tax, I'll just put that over here, is going to be 370. And this is coming from the W-2 for the spouse. So that adds it to 820. That's not going to go anywhere in the federal return, most likely, unless basically we itemize. Then it could possibly be the deductible for an itemized deduction for taxes. So that's in essence what we have thus far. So we've got the 80, we can kind of recalculate it from the source document here. And so that brings us down to the 55. So we've got the income, 2 W-2s adding up to the 80,000. We've got then the standard deduction at the 24,800 for married filing joint. That brings our taxable income to the 55,200. And then I can double, and then we've got our payment. So that 55,200, then if I come back on over here and just double check it here, that ties out. So 55,200. So we've kind of double checked it. And you can see if you do this separately from the data input, you have a double check. And if you do it separately with two individuals doing it separately too, they're more likely not to make the same kind of errors, as well. But one person just doing the data input twice, I think is a good little check. Doesn't take too much time once you get used to it. Now, I'm going to depend on the software generally to calculate. So, and I wouldn't do it every time after every piece of document that we input. I'd do it at the end. But now I'm going to depend on Lacert. This one I'm actually going to pull from the software, not from the data input. I'm not going to try to recalculate the tax because a progressive system's kind of complicated, and I'm not sure it's worthwhile to do that. So I'm going to say this is coming up to, what was it, 6232? 6232. And that does give us basically our average here, our average taxable, our tax divided by the taxable income gives us our effective rate of the 11.3. So if I go back on over, and then the bottom line down here is there's our 8,000 of payments. So then we're down here at the 1768. So 1768, there's our refund of 1768. And we can also see this kind of tax summary in this software in this format as well. So this kind of lines up more to our equation, the 80,000. Itemized deductions we're not taking. We're taking the 24.8. There's the taxable income. There's the tax being calculated. There's the 8,000 that we paid with the W-2. And then there's the 1,768. And then we have the effective tax rate, that 11.3, which we see here we calculated at the 11.3 as well. And then the marginal rate at the 12, that being the top tax rate. So that's what we have thus far. We're going to keep on entering the data. Again, I wouldn't really calculate the tax here or even do the Excel data input until we finish all the documents. But I think as we do a practice problem like this, it's good to go each step along the way. So we'll just continue to input into this data for the next items as we continue on from the W-2 information to the 1099s.